Good morning and welcome to the Daily Tanya. Today is Friday, the 21st day of Adar Aleph. Let's begin with Tzedakah. Gedela, Tzedakah, Shenakareves es HaGeula. Tzedakah brings Mashiach closer. And today we're going to finish chapter 30. This chapter that talks about Heveish Fal Ruach B'fnei Kol Adam, to feel, consider ourselves lower than any human being, any other person. And we discussed this for the past few days, how this is a way that the Alter Rebbe says we need to consider ourselves lower in order to break ourselves. And that is particularly in a situation when a person feels a lack of passion, a lack of sensitivity, spiritual sensitivity, an emotional numbness to godliness, and he has to break out of this situation. And for that, the Alter Rebbe gave different advice, and one of them is to consider yourself, compare yourself. You think you're doing everything right, and all the mitzvahs, you're fulfilling all the God's commandments. So you think you're perfect, but think about it that you're really not as perfect, and that when you look at other people that seem to be in a much lower place than you, they're not observing as you, and they're not doing what God wants. They're doing terrible things. And yet, you should consider yourself lower than them. And he explained why. Because it's not about what they do, it's about the challenges that they have. And when a person is in an environment that gives a lot of challenges, and he has a passionate nature, and it's very hard for him to not to violate, not to succumb to his temptations. So the question is, what you have to ask yourself is, are you fighting your own challenges the same way that he's fighting his? And the last few days we explained that if we really think about it, if we really do an honest assessment with ourselves, we realize that in our areas, whether it's in prayer, the concentration in prayer, whether it's in doing mitzvahs tzedakah, whether it's in not to stop in the middle of a nice conversation we have, not to speak bad about another person, all of those things, small things that seem small, but they're not, because they're challenges that it's very hard to, it seems very not important, but those are the places where we are required to really put up a fight, and we're not. And that's what Alter Rebbe says. That's why you're not better than the other person. But the question is, what Alter Rebbe is concluding that today, yes, understand I'm not better, but am I worse than the other person? He's not overcoming his challenges. I'm not overcoming my challenges. So we're all the same. Why am I worse than him? Says the Alter Rebbe, yes, indeed. Because the more you know, the lower you should think of yourself. The fact that he doesn't overcome his challenges is because he doesn't know much. He doesn't know enough. He didn't learn Tanya. But you know better. You should be in a higher place. You should be able to overcome more than the person who doesn't know. So let's see inside what the Alter Rebbe says. Aval be'emes, im yedei ha-sefer, u'machazik b'tiras Hashem v'kirvas Elokim yechpatz. In truth, however, if he is a scholar and upholds God's Torah and wishes to be close to God, Godel avoinoi min soy v'ashmosoi godlo bekiflei kiflaim. His sin is unbearably great, and his guilt is increased manifold. ומה שאינו נלחם ומסגבר על יצרוי בערך ובחינס מלחמה עצומה הנזכרת לעיל. For he's not waging war and not overcoming his impulse in a manner commensurate with the quality and nature of the war that mentioned above, that the Kal Shebekalim must face, as we mentioned in the previous lessons. The Kal Shebekalim, the lower of the low, he needs to wage a war. He has a passionate passion like fire, like a burning furnace, we said. And he has to wage a war in order not to do those things. I say once the story about Reb David of Lelev, the tzaddik. He was once walking in a forest, and he sees a simple young peasant and fighting with his father, and he's having an axe. And he's screaming at his father, and he said to his father, "If I wouldn't fear God, I would chop your head off." And this tzaddik was standing there, and he was just observing this in awe. This is how this person, such a lowlife, obviously he can kill someone. He's ready to kill, and he lives but he's not going to do it. Why? Because he fears God. What kind of challenges he has to fight? He's to hold on his temptations. So, and that's what he was contemplating, was thinking about this. How much we need to fight our own battles, our own challenges. So it says it's a person who knows and is not fighting his fight. So it's worse. His guilt is far greater than the guilt of the Kal Shebekalim, the most worthless of the street corner squatters, who are remote from God and His Torah. Their guilt for not summoning up the fear of God, who knows and sees all their actions in order to restrain their impulse, which burns like a fiery flame, is not as heinous. Again, ואין השמוסם גדול כל כך, ושאינם כובשים יצרם הבורא כאיש לאובה מפני פחד השם המבין ומביט אל כל מעשיהם. כאשמס כל הקורא והקורא אל השם ואל תירוסו ועבודוסוי, as the guilt of one who draws ever nearer to God, His Torah, and His service. So the closer you are to Hashem, the more it is expected of you. As our sages of blessed memory said of the apostate Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, because he knew my glory, said God. If despite this he still sinned, his guilt is far greater. This is the sage. The Talmud tells us about the sage that went astray and went against God. But he was a sage. He knew. And he appreciated the truth. But he went away. So his sin is far greater, far worse. And that's why he says, the Alter Rebbe, our sages say that when you're talking about people who are illiterate, people who are not knowledgeable, not scholars, when they do a sin intentionally, God considers them as inadvertent, as unintentional. On the other end, a person who does person who is a scholar and it does something unintentional is considered like an intentional sin. Why is that? It's like, for example, if you take a child, there's in the house, there's a very, very expensive item, very antique vase that's worth millions of dollars. The child gets upset, he gets angry, he decides he's taking the vase and smashing it into pieces. He has no clue what this is worth, what the value of it is. So of course, whatever he does is punished and he needs to be disciplined and so on. But can he be considered that he intentional caused damage of millions of dollars? Obviously not. He doesn't know what it is. But when a person does appreciate this value and he carries the vase and by accident he dropped it and it broke, he would be considered liable, even if it was by accident. Because you know the value of it, you should be much more careful with this. And that's what the Alter Rebbe says. The people who are not knowledgeable, therefore are much less liable. That's what the Alter Rebbe concludes here. Therefore, our sages declare in regard to the illiterate that deliberate sins are regarded in their case as inadvertent acts, since they are unaware of the gravity of their sins. With a scholar, the reverse is true. An oversight due to lack of study is adjudged as being as grave as deliberate sin. Thus, his failure to restrain his evil impulse is indeed worse than the failure of the Kal Shebekalim, the lowest of the low. So by contemplating this, the observant scholar will now be able to fulfill the instruction of the Mishnah quoted in the beginning of the chapter. He said, "Veishfal ruach b'fnei kol adam," be lowly of spirit before every man. Thereby, what's all of this about? He will crush his own spirit and the spirit of the Sitra Achra in his animal soul, enabling the light of his soul to permeate and irradiate his body, as explained in chapter 29. So this is the end of this chapter, and that's the bottom line. And the bottom line is, all of this is in order to break out of the apathy, break out of the numbness, is when we consider ourselves that we're really lower than everybody else. But one thing we have to keep in mind, does it really mean that a person who is constantly doing Torah, praying, is like a tzaddik, is he really lower than the other person? Well, obviously, in truth, when you judge a person, when you, or a third person, judges these two people, obviously, that person is in a much greater level. He does everything and serves Hashem, and he's doing everything right. And that is true according to Torah. If that person walks in the room, we have to stand up in front of him. But here it's not about the deeds and the action and the place where they stand in front of Hashem. It's about their own inner feeling, the deeper avoda within themselves, serving and inspecting themselves for themselves. And for ourselves, we have to, on one hand, appreciate and understand the greatness that we are. But at the same time, know that we have a way to go. Just to give an example, there was a chassid, Reb Chaim Morozov, and let's say when he got married, he went to buy furniture with his newlywed, with his wife. And they go to the furniture store and they show him a nice piece of furniture, simple. He wasn't looking for any luxury. A furniture set for 500 rubles. And they decided, okay, we'll take this. And then after they decided, they still wanted to go see the other options. And they showed him this place and go to another place. It was like a very expensive piece of furniture for 5,000 rubles. And he asked the storeman, what's the difference? Why is this 500, this 5,000? He says, what are you talking about? This is a whole different thing. This is a whole different type of wood, and this, you can't compare this. It's not the same. You're comparing apples to oranges here. So the chassid, and then he says to him, but you know what? I actually have this kind of set for 2,500 ruble. He says, why? He says, because there is a few slight damages in the set, and you can get it for 2,500. So Reb Choni Morozov, being a smart Yid, says, wait a second, I got an idea. He says to his wife, let's go back to the other thing. We'll take a damage of the lower one, will be 250 ruble instead of 500. He says, no. The lower quality, even if it's a little damaged, it may be a few rubles less, but it's not going to be such a big difference in the effect that the damage has in the expensive piece is much more. And Reb Choni Morozov said, from this I learned 3 lessons of what the quality of a tamim. What is a tamim? Tamim is a chassid, a yeshiva boy in the Lubavitch yeshiva. He says, what is the quality of a tamim? He says, number 1, it's a whole different quality. Person who studies in the Rebbe's yeshiva, studies the Torah, studies Chassidus, it's a whole different quality. You cannot even compare it to regular quality. And number 2, the slightest damage in a tamim is very noticeable and causes a lot and lowers the value a lot. And number 3, finally, he says the price of a damaged tamim, a damaged quality bacher from the yeshiva, is way, way more than someone who is not, that has no damage at all. So in other words, if you ask yourself, so if knowing more makes you less, then why should I know more? Maybe I should be less. Maybe I should be in the lower level. I said, absolutely not. You can, even if it's damaged, the price is much more. The fact that we have the privilege to study the Tanya, the fact that we have the privilege to serve Hashem, that's what we should appreciate, and appreciating the value that we have. And of course, there's always the tshuva that is able to elevate us and clean us from all the damages, big or small. That's the end of today's share. Should have a wonderful day and a very good Shabbos, and we'll see you with Hashem after Shabbos.